9:50. Excellent. Well, this is our last segment before I leave for the States. And all being well, we will resume in the middle of March. And we are in the last part, well, the penultimate part of the Guide for the Perplexed of our trip into the guide. We haven't done everything in it, and some of it is a little too arcane. That is, it speaks to the past much more than it speaks to the present. But the third aspect is that of the reasons for the commandments, Ta'amei HaMitzvot. And we started that last time before actually, and we know that the Rambam insists that every mitzvah has a reason that we can understand by rational means. Now, it may be difficult for us at first blush or first glance, but there will be a reason, always a reason that we can understand, because God doesn't do anything without a reason. He doesn't want us to be unreasonable people and believe in anything. We test everything with our reason because that's our God-given gift to be superior human beings, creatures of reason. And so Rambam talks about those who oppose the use of reason. He argues against their views very strenuously. And then he goes on to say that in order to understand the reasons, you may have to go back into the past. Historical reasons, but they're also relevant today. That's very important. And one of the things that the Rambam did in order to understand reasons in the Torah was to look at the books of the Sabians. Sabians, again, a name that the Muslims used in the Middle Ages to describe the idolaters, mainly star worshippers. And that's where the phrase akum, oved kochavim umazalot, comes from. People who worship stars and planet and signs of the zodiac, akum. And their books, he said he studied at great length. He gives us a long list of books on idolatry he studied. Of course, the book of Nabatean agriculture being very important right through the Middle Ages. These are agrarian societies. Therefore, you need to have good rainfall and good crops. So what the Torah does is that it aims to uproot this idolatry based on the worship of stars. And for example, the Torah will say, well, if you worship stars, then there'll be no rain and there'll be no fruit, barren land, no health, early death, and all the bad things. But if you refuse to go along with star worship and the Sabian cults, then you will have great rain, you'll have lots of fruit, the land will be extremely rich, you'll have great health, and you'll live a long time. So this is the direction he goes to explain many of the mitzvot that we really don't have a handle on. I'll throw out two. One I mentioned last time, Shartanez. Sabian religion, whatever it was, definitely wanted to combine the vegetable world and the animal world in terms of the clothes one wore. So Shartanez, the Jewish practice, never puts on a garment made of wool or linen, or even wants to cover oneself up with a blanket made of wool or linen. And of course, meat and milk, again, would be the synthesis of different types of animal products, highly regarded by the Sabians and forbidden to us, especially the goat, the kid in the mother's milk. But we will go through all of these, in fact, in the 14 groups the Rambam has based upon his Mishneh Torah, halachic work, Sefer HaMitzvot, 14 groups, Yad HaChazakah, Yad being 14. So we'll understand the reasons for the entire range of mitzvot. We'll also understand, of course, why they're still relevant. But many of us, of course, are happier, the very basic level of the Torah, which are mitzvot aimed at the fulfillment of the first goal, in practice, which is the betterment of society. Few of us will advance to the higher reaches of true spiritual perfection. Intellectual spiritual perfection, these are mitzvot as well, but they're less tangible, not easy to get a good grasp on. And this is an elitist view, because fits in well with Aristotle, with Greek thought, and we've said that many times. So without further ado, we're going to have a look at something slightly different this evening. We're going to start with Maimonides' famous letter on astrology. Now, astrology, of course, is studying the stars, constellations, planets, anything like that, in order to know how to achieve success in life. Horoscopes, under which planetary influence you are born, where you are at different times of the month. To this day, many people, I think, will read their horoscopes and will act in accordance with them. But one can look at this as a slight sort of, or a simulacrum, a small form of idolatry in general. The problem with idolatry, not that people worship images as we have already read, it's that they are distracted from what is rational. They are distracted from the true God, and they worship other gods. Remember, we also cited the statement that once you give up worshiping God, you will not worship nothing, you'll worship something else. And that something else, as Emil Kammertz, that Belgian come Englishman, said, will probably be worse than worshiping God. And I'm not going to go into the history of humankind or even of Western culture, take us far too long. But Maimonides had a particular dislike then for what many and the majority of the Jews of his time accepted, which was astrology. Astrologia, or itstagninut. And even if you've used old machzorim from the old days, you may have on Pesach and on Sukkot gone to the back of the machzor. I certainly did as a small boy, and looked at these little pictures. The signs of the zodiac, they're all there. The machzorim that came with Yiddish taich, had these pictures of the zodiac, which was attractive to a rather bored small boy who wanted some comic relief in the long davening full of piyutim. You went to the back, and all of these pictures there, archers, twins, scales. Thank you. I hear that there was also a Virgo there, but there we are. I'm sure that at the age of 6, I didn't know what that was. Anyhow, whatever the case may be, tremendous belief in mazal. If I say mazel tov, what do I mean? What does the word mazal actually mean? What is a mazal? You're free to answer. Well, you say
born under a good mazal.
It is exactly precisely the term for your astrological fate. You're born under a good mazal or under a bad mazal, and you are going to be a person with certain proclivities. The word mazel does not mean luck. That Melanie is your Englishness coming out, But the Hebrew mazal, or and not actually Hebrew, but it doesn't matter. The word we use, mazel, definitely means the sign of the zodiac you were born under, your horoscope. Yesh mazal Yisrael, en mazal Yisrael. The Gemara, Masechet Sanhedrin, discusses whether Jews are bound by the signs of the zodiac that apparently govern the lives of everyone else. Are we free from that? And if so, to what extent? Now, you're dealing with over 1,000 years of belief. Anybody give me the name of a famous commentator on the Torah who is absolutely addicted to astrology? And it's easy. Hello?
Ramban?
No, addicted to astrology. It's easy because it's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet in both the first name and in the family name, the surname. In English, Abraham ben Ezra. Avraham ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra wrote a whole book. He was addicted to astrology. So this is the world in which the Rambam lived, and therefore it is amazing to read the following letter. Now here, I'm going to ask potential readers to unmute because it's in English. The letter was written in Arabic. We don't need to read it in Arabic. I'm going to spare you this evening the Hebrew and have a bit of light Hanukkah relief. So, who'd like to begin? So I could, of course, pick a victim. I assume you can all read it clearly. So we're going to go for somebody with great vocal talent, and that is Melanie. You're well prepared. Please begin. To the sages of Marseille.
To the sages of Marseille, know, my masters, that it is not proper for a man to accept as trustworthy anything other than one of these three things.
Now, the nice thing about this letter is that Rambam gives us the basis for what he regards as rational thought. Read on, please.
The first is a thing for which there is a clear proof deriving from man's reasoning, such as arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy.
Well, man includes the feminine as well. Now, these are things that the Rambam had no doubt about. Arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy, they are rationally compelling. Okay. Secondly, the second
is a thing that a man perceives through one of the five senses, such as when he knows with certainty that this is red and this is black, and the like, through the sight of his eye, or as when he tastes that this is bitter and this is sweet, or as when he feels that this is hot and this is cold, or as when he hears that this sound is clear and this sound is indistinct, or as when he smells that this is a pleasing smell and this is a displeasing smell, and the like.
You can argue philosophically with all of these, whether mathematics really is absolutely apodictic, that is, it's so logically compelling that you can never deviate from the results of a mathematical theorem. You can argue that there could be some subjectivity in the way our senses respond, but most rational people would accept that there's no problem with these things. There's sufficient consensus. Let's have a look at the third thing. The third is a thing.
The third is a thing that a man receives from the prophets or from the righteous.
Now, therefore, we could always argue about that, but Maimonides, of course, is a man of God. And so he says that if you know how to work out what the prophets really said, or what the righteous really said, and you've written a code of Jewish law like his Mishneh Torah, then you understand that too, okay? So it's interesting. It's a combination, true medieval style of rationality and religion. They always went hand in hand. And this is what modern scholars try to do as well, to reintroduce the link between religion and science and philosophical thought. Okay, every reasonable man
ought to distinguish in his mind and thought all the things that he accepts as trustworthy and say, this I accept as trustworthy because of tradition, and this because of sense perception, and this on grounds of reason.
Now, this is beautiful Greek reasoning. This is Aristotle. Everything is classified. Everything has to be criticized. Nothing is taken for granted. What a wonderful, rational idea. Let's read on. Anyone
who accepts as trustworthy anything that is not of these three species, of him it is said, the simple believes everything.
Petty, ya'amin l'chol davar, and simple doesn't mean nice and simple, it means the idiot will believe things without testing them out. And the lack of critical thought is such a problem in society. Rambam, of course, begins by saying, if you believe without thinking critically, then you are an idiot. Thus, you ought to know. Then he goes on to say something even more compelling. So shall we thank Melanie and ask an Australian to read? Jeff, would you like to read, please? Thus, you ought to know. Line 16.
Okay, we 916.
Yeah, Len, thus you ought to know, the end of the line.
That fools have composed thousands of books of nothingness and emptiness. Any number of men, great in years but not in wisdom, wasted all their days, or I've lost the place, wasted all their in studying these books and imagined that these follies are science. They came to think of themselves as wise men because they knew that science, the thing about which most of the world is, or all of it, save for a few individuals, the remnant of whom the Lord shall call, is that thing of which I am apprising you. The great sickness and the grievous evil consists in this, that all the things that man find written in books he presumes to think of as true, and all the more so if the books are old.
That, of course, is the past. Remember,
Yeah.
Aristotle ruled intellectual thought in Europe for well over 1,000 years. Galen in the field of medicine, well over 1,000 years. So Rambam looks around and he says, look, the people living in my time who believe anything they read in an old book, they are fools and idiots because they do not use and exercise critical thought. And
since many individuals have busied themselves with these books and have engaged in discussions concerning them, the rash fellow's mind at once leaps to the conclusion these are the words of wisdom, and he says to himself, has the pen of the scribes written in vain? And have they vainly engaged in these things?
Well, of course, the answer is no. But then you will be shallow, foolish, because you believe what's written in books, especially if they're old. And I wonder, this may apply to the religions as well, that old books may, in fact, not be worthwhile reading at all. Okay, so you have to exercise your critical faculty all the time. Well, this is why our kingdom
was lost and our temple was destroyed.
Line 29. Line 28. And why we were brought to this.
And are no more because they found many books dealing with these themes of the stargazers, that these things being the root of idolatry, as we have made clear in laws concerning idolatry. They erred and were drawn after them, imagining them to be glorious science and to be of great unity. They did not busy themselves with utility, yeah. They did not busy themselves with the art of war or the conquest of lands, but imagined that those studies would help them. Therefore the prophets called them fools and dolts. And truly fools they were, for they walked after confused things that do not profit. No,
you follow ridiculous ideas, you become a stupid person.
Know, my masters, that I myself investigated much into these matters. The first thing I studied is that science which is called judicial astrology. That is the science by which man may know what will come to pass in the world, or in this or in that city or kingdom, what will happen to a particular individual all the days of his life. I also have read in all matters concerning all of idolatry. So it seems to me that there does not remain in the world a composition on this subject, having been translated into Arabic from other languages, but that I have read it and I have understood its subject matter and I have plumbed the depths of its thought.
The Rambam gives you his method. He says, I am critical. I need to analyze everything. I am going to target the foolishness of a very prevalent belief in general society in the Muslim world and in Jewish society, the belief in stars, their influence, and judicial astrology, that you have to take care, that people are born under a muzzle, okay? A mazal. The Gemara is full of these stories. Remember the great Purim story, okay? Involving Rava and
Ravashi told that if you are not born on Wednesday, you will be a thief.
Right, exactly. There are all sorts of stories, but Rav and Rav Yosef, they made a Purim Suda. Remember the Gemara Masechet Megillah, and Rav got drunk, and he killed Rav Yosef. And then when he became sober, he prayed. And Rav Yosef came back to life. Now, why did he kill Rav Yosef? Because he was born under the Mazal Ma'adim. He was born under Mars. The planetary influence that directed his life was Martian. Okay, he was a Martian. He's prone to violence because Mars is identified with red, with blood. Okay, so he's a bloodthirsty person. And at his birth, he would apparently have to be somebody who thirsts for blood. Now, a Rav always tried to deny this, but then they told him, actually, you do spill blood, but in a metaphorical way, okay? You use your tongue, you tongue lash people, and you kill them more or less in a metaphorical way. But when he lost his self-control, he became drunk, his Martian tendencies came out, he killed Rav Yosef, but he prayed and brought him back to life. The next year, Rav invites Rav Yosef to his Purim Suda. And what does Rav Yosef say? Lo kol shata itracha shanisa. Miracles don't happen every year. And I don't know whether I'll come back to life after your assault on me once, you're deep in your cups, and you've lost your self-control. So this is Mazal. It's all over the Gemara, Jean, as you said. So Rambam says, however, okay, this is all rubbish, okay? And he says, I have read it and understand its subject matter, and plumb the depths of its thought. From these books, line 2, anybody else like to read? Do I hear? Then I'm going back to my favorite readers. Melanie, can I put you back on, please? Line 2, from these books.
From those books, it became clear to me what the reason is for all those commandments that everyone comes to think of as having no reason at all, other than the decree of Scripture. I already have a great composition on this subject in the Arabic language, namely the Guide of the Perplexed, with lucid proofs for every single commandment, but this is not required of us now.
But we are going to do this in March, from March when I get back. I now return, all being well, okay? I now
return to the subject of your inquiry. Know, my masters, that every one of those things concerning judicial astrology that its adherents maintain, namely that something will happen one way and not another, and that the constellation under which one is born will draw him on, so that he will be of such and such a kind, and so that something will happen to him one way and not another, all those assertions are far from being scientific, they are stupidity. There are lucid, faultless proofs refuting all the roots of those assertions. Never did one of those genuinely wise men of the nation busy himself with this matter or write on it. No
Has
nation wrote
Aristotle
such...
written on astrology? The answer is no. Astronomy, yes. And astrology, no. Okay?
Right. So Aristotle is genuinely wise. Right. No nation wrote such compositions or committed the error of calling it a science other than the Chaldeans, Chaldeans, Egyptians, and Canaanites.
Those Chaldeans are from Urakastim. Urakastim, from which Abraham's family came. The Chaldeans are the Babylonians, Chaldim, Canaanites, and Egyptians who were mired in star worship and Satanism. For what was their religion? For that was their religion in those days.
But that was their religion in those days. But the wise men of Greece, and they are the philosophers who wrote on science and busied themselves with all the species of science, mock and scorn and ridicule these four nations that I've mentioned to you, and they rallied proofs to refute their entire position, root and branch. The wise men of Persia also recognized and understood that all that science which the Chaldeans, Chaldeans, Egyptians, and Canaanites produced is a falsehood and a lie. Do not imagine that those refutations are mere assertions, and that we therefore should not put our trust in them. Rather, there are lucid and correct, faultless proofs to refute that entire position, and the only one who would cling to it would be a simple one who believes everything, or one who wishes to deceive others.
Because you use things like astrology, idol worship in general was used in the ancient world to exert power. Idols were very wonderful. You know, they could move, they could talk, hydraulics, physics, biochemistry, alchemy, whatever. the people who exerted power were the ones who ran the idolatrous system. And the people who believed, they're the petty yamin l'chol davar, the simple. And now, know my masters, line 23.
And know, my masters, that the science of the stars that is genuine science is knowledge of the form of the spheres.
Now
their
that
number,
you'll find
their
in
measure.
Aristotle and in Plato and in Archimedes, the 9 spheres which surround the world. That was the Ptolemide astronomy of the time. That's science.
The course they follow, each one's period of revolution, their declination to the north or to the south, their revolving to the east or to the west, and the orbit of every star and what its course is. On all this and the like, the wise men of Greece, Persia, and India wrote composition. This is an exceedingly glorious science. By means of it, the onset of the eclipse of the luminaries may be known, and when they will be eclipsed at any given place.
Of course,
by means of it,
eclipses
they may
were a
be known.
real favorite of medieval astronomy and even early modern astronomy. If you could predict an eclipse, you would be very influential indeed. And many of the people who rose to prominence did so because they predicted eclipses. But you can do that if you know astronomy. But of course, that's a far cry from astrology. Okay, and he goes on to show you, Rambam wrote Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh. When you learn his laws of calculating when a Jewish new month begins, as we just celebrated today, you have to know astronomy. You have to know about the moon. You have to know about the 29 days and the 30 days. Rambam is full of this. In fact, even the Gemara says, there's a pasuk in Dvarim that says, Ki hi chokhmatchem uvinatchem le'enei ha'amim. This is your wisdom and discernment in the eyes of the nations. Asher yishmu et shimacha lemor, who will hear of your learning, and they will say, Rak am chacham anavon agoy hagadol hazeh. This is a really smart people. That's what we want to be famous for smartness in rational matters. And so he goes on to say, by means of it, line 30, there may be known.
By means of it, there may be known the cause for the moon's appearing just like a bow, then waxing great until it is full, and then gradually waning. By means of it, there may be known when the moon will or will not be seen, and the reason why one day will be long and another day short.
You need that
How
to
many
calculate the
amazing-
prayers, morning prayer, afternoon prayer, evening prayer. All of these things need calculation. They need some astronomical knowledge, and this is where the Jews should shine. Astronomy, yes. How many amazing conditions?
How many amazing conditions are made intelligible by this science, which is undoubtedly true. It is this calculation of astronomical cycles of which the Talmudic sages said that it is your wisdom and understanding in the sight of the people.
Wow, the
But as for these,
Talmud took the words right out of my mouth. Okay, actually, it's in the Torah. Ki hi chokhmatchem uvinatchem le'enei ha'amim. What is it that makes you outstanding in your knowledge? The fact that you have mathematical, astronomical awareness. In fact, the Gemara in Pesachim implies that the rabbis knew about the Copernican system. They knew that the earth went around the sun, but the non-Jewish nations followed Ptolemy, and the Talmud eventually ends the debate by saying, well, the non-Jewish nations have it right. But eventually, of course, Ptolemy went out, Copernicus came in, and there we are. So this is our wisdom. But as for these assertions, perhaps we'll go back to you, Jeff. Thank you. Thank you, Melanie. Wonderfully read. Now we're going to have another equally wonderful Antipodean reading, 36.
Okay. But as for these assertions of the stupid astrologers, they are nothing. And know, my masters, that one of the roots of the religion of Moses, our teacher, and one that all the philosophers also acknowledge, that every action of human beings is left to them, and that there is nothing to constrain or draw them.
This is very important, very important. People tend to find excuses for what they do. Maimonides is one of the great teachers of freedom of choice, freedom of will. You cannot say that something else made me do bad, evil. You are responsible for what you do, you have the ability to control what you think and what you do. And at the end of the day, it is you. There are no excuses under the sun. Okay? This is a very important principle in the Rambam. Okay.
Rather, if he so pleases, a man will worship God and become wise and sit in the house of study. And if he so pleases, he will follow the counsel of the wicked and run with thieves and hide with adulterers. There is no influence or constellation under which one is born that will draw him in any manner towards any one of these ways. Hence, it was commanded and told to him, do this and do not do that.
That's why we have mitzvot. You
Mhm.
can't say, I'm sorry I broke this commandment because I could substitute nature for stars or constellations and say, well, my psychology, my biochemistry. The end of the day, Rambam, and he makes this a major theme in many of his writings, you have to take yourself in charge, live a proper life, and you cannot retreat into any sanctuary of sin. Well, I couldn't help it. No such thing. Not from a Maimonidean point of view.
We have made clear many of the things involved in these matters in most of our Arab compositions, or in the commentary on the Mishnah and in the rest of the compositions.
Everything except the Mishnah Torah's Great Code was written in Arabic, of course. But the Great Code, the Mishnah Torah, was written in Hebrew, and Maimonides took great pleasure in this Hebrew. He said this is the best Hebrew, and he invested a lot of effort. And in truth, this is a work which is pellucid in its clarity. The Mishneh Torah is beguiling because it's such a wonderfully clear, crisp, and clear Hebrew that sometimes he leads you astray, but nevertheless, he took great pleasure in the language. But the rest was all in Arabic. And his Arabic compositions, he makes it very clear that at the end of the day, nothing controls a person outside his or her own will. You just have to work very hard to be able to control the things that make a person up. I know, and now I've bolded this. The question, of course, the Rambam has to deal with, as we said before, as Jean said, but the Gemara, the Midrashim, our Machzorim, our folk traditions are full of the influence of astrology and the effects that some things may happen on one. Almost something that people need to believe. There's something out there that made me do this or prevented me. And had I not walked out when the black cat ran in front of me, I wouldn't have lost a huge amount on the stock market, or something else would have happened to me. There seems to be a deep human need for that. This is what we as Maimonideans have to control and subjugate and make subservient to the intellect. And now he goes on to say, to explain this in the following terms. Jeff, I know the bold line 3.
Okay, I know that you may search and find sayings of some individual sages in the Talmud and Midrashim, whose word appeared to maintain that at the moment of a man's birth, the stars will cause such and such thing to happen to him.
Okay, now he, of course, says the sayings of some individual sages. So he wants to prepare you for the fact that this is not the view, like the authorized view of the whole of the Talmud. Remember, these are still individual views. Read on.
Do not regard this as a difficulty, for it is not proper to abandon matters of reason that have already been verified by proofs, shake loose of them, and depend on the words of a single one of those sages for whom possibly the matter was hidden.
Now he's saying that, in fact, those individual sages may not be that wise or reasonable. Sages can vary in their reasonableness, okay? So we are preparing the ground for disregarding opinions of Chazal, our rabbis in the Talmud and in the Midrash. All right. Or there may be an illusion.
Or there may be an illusion in those words.
They're not meant to be taken literally. They mean something else.
Or they may have been said with a view to the times and the particular context. The word context. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You surely know how many of the verses of the Torah are not to be taken literally.
Now, the Rambam began, and we began our study of the Rambam's Moreh Nevukhim by showing how you have to be careful whenever a statements are made about God. They're not to be taken literally. They're not to be understood as we do. So all the prisms we have of reasonableness, of language, of theology, all of them are being brought to bear by the Rambam here to tell the Chachmei Marseille, could be Montpellier, but I'm not going to go into that now, that you're not to believe in astrology, okay? And if you find bits and pieces in the Talmud which do talk about astrology, and there are many, then they are either individual sages, sages who possibly were not particularly reasonable. There may be allusions or metaphors. There may be particular time and context. Since it is known, line 11.
Since it is known through proofs of reason that it is impossible for a thing to be literally so, the Targum rendered it in a form that reason will abide.
And we go back to Targum Onkelos. Onkelos will go through all the Torah, and he will tell you that those things that imply that God has a body are to be understood. Not so. God doesn't have a body. Okay, they are to be interpreted rationally. And here he says a nice line which you can always use. A man
should never cast his reason behind him, for the eyes are set in the front, not in the back.
Where are your eyes? Not in the back, they're in the front, so use them. And the eyes, of course, of the Rambam mean the rational faculty. So this is the lecture on astrology, and I cite it because it gives you, as I said, a night off Ibn Tibbon, and it also casts the Maimonidean agenda in very clear rational terms. His pet peeve was astrology, and many of the commandments will be explained in terms of a rejection, but it is also sloughing off responsibility for what you do. And this is why Emil Kammert said, if you get rid of a true religion, Maimonides would say rational Judaism, where do you go? You go to a world in which you can excuse yourself for doing the wrong things, because you will have another God. The God will be communism or socialism or capitalism, or it will involve superstition or the stars or horoscopes or voodoo, what you name it, it's there. We never live in an ideological or religious vacuum. And that will generally be worse because you can excuse yourself. The whole basis of the Torah and Maimonides' theology is that the Torah presents you with mitzvot. His great work, Sefer HaMitzvot, classifying, going through the mitzvot, because mitzvah implies free will, and free will doesn't let you excuse yourself. Rambam was very keen that there are no excuses. And when he talks about, and this is another topic, but sexual crimes, somebody says, I need, in order to have some kind of peace of mind, to commit one of the sexual crimes, otherwise I will go mad. Rambam says there's no such thing. You will not go mad. You have to exercise self-control. So he would not be very patient, I think, with psycho-biological, biochemical explanations of people's conduct. He would say, at the end of the day, we all have something of that, and the system of mitzvot requires that we do what's right and avoid what is wrong. Would not be very patient with much of the psychobiological stuff that tends to go on. Of course, this is just Maimonides' view. And I see, from a medical perspective, from a psychiatric perspective, Jeff, we may be skating on thin ice here, would you say, if there was any ice that you skated on in Sydney? But never mind. Okay?
We'll leave that alone for the moment.
We will leave that alone, but we'll come back to that when I come back in March, in Yitzhak Hashem, when we look at some of these specific mitzvot, again, the fact that the Rambam wrote his letter to Yemen and wrote Igeret Kiddush Hashem proves that in real life he was more forgiving. But the main thing I want to point up now, unless there are questions, feel free to just say or comment, is that Rambam is an exceptional exception here. In his time, he is amazingly exceptional, as I said, quoting Ibn Ezra. But certainly a generation, 2 or 3 later, or even today, this would not be received with great enthusiasm by the Daf Yomi people, okay? It's not part of the Rabboisai cult. It's something else. So there is an extract here I will read. Line 15. Uvavadai, I'm reading a response of the Rashba, which is actually attributed to Ramban. Uvavadai mashma shein ha'atztigninus bichlal nichush. Rabbi Solomon Ben Aderet, a famous Spanish scholar who, together with the Rosh, issued the second ban on the Guide for the Perplexed, all right, or rather Greek philosophy. He was asked about astrology, and he says that astrology is definitely not forbidden by the Torah, which Maimonides says it is. Okay, in his Laws of Avodah Zarah, he calls it nichush. Now the Torah says in Vayikra, chapter Yutet, lo tanachashu. Now tanachashu, which is translated as divining, is basically interpreting omens. I opened my door this morning, a black cat ran in front of me. I therefore went back inside, closed the door, and never left the rest of the day. Because the black cat in front of me is a bad omen, and I'm going to have a bad day. All right? That you are not allowed to do, together with like consulting the dead and all the other prohibitions that we have. Okay? But astrology is not part of that prohibition. Rabbi Chanina savar mazal ma'ashir v'yesh mazal leYisrael. Indeed, we have a discussion in the last parak of Masechet Shabbat, Daf Kuf Nun Vav, about whether Jews are controlled by astrological omens, okay? Or rather are controlled by the constellations and the stars. We'll say that. Rabbi Chanina says yes. If you're born under the right mazal, you can become rich. If you're born under the right mazal, you can become wise, okay? Or you'll be prone to violence, like our story about the Purim Sudai Masechet Nigila, about Rava and Rav Yosef. The Yesh Mazal Yisrael. Now the other rabbis, Rabbi Yochanan, disagrees. And even if the halakha is not like Rabbi Chanina, it's certainly not prohibited under the biblical prohibition on divining. There's a Mishnah that says we may not divine using the stars. That's not astrology. That's something much more primitive. That's what I just mentioned. The Gemara would appear to believe that this is in fact true. Astrology. Abraham, our great-great-grandfather, was told in the passage in Lech Lecha, Seina usafor hakochavim, go out and look at the stars in the heaven. Now, the rabbis interpret this because it's in the same paragraph that talks about him having a son. And the Midrash says that Abraham believed that astrologically speaking, his constellation, his stars were not good for having a child. In fact, he didn't have one with Sarah anyhow. So God says, Seina, Hashamayma, Seina Ure'ei, bashamayim usafor hakochavim mi yuchal lispor. Count the stars. Leave your astrology. Count the stars. That is the number of the children you are going to have. Not direct children, but descendants. In other words, Abraham believed in astrology. God says you will not be subject to astrology. In fact, part of the Jewish story may be that against the odds, we have survived. Ubid Rabbi Akiva dahava daig amlata de batre tuva. Now, the story in that sugi in Shabbat involves Rabbi Akiva. His daughter was born under a particular constellation. This is a bit like Sleeping Beauty, that folk tale. And the day that she marries, she will die. So, but apparently Rabbi Akiva, although he was worried, he did approve of the marriage, and the marriage was about to take place. Okay, and what happened? At night, before she went to bed on her bridal night, she stuck a hairpin into the wall of the bedroom. In the morning, when she got up alive, she pulled out the hairpin and saw that it had pierced a poisonous snake, an asp that was in a hole in the wall that would have crawled out in the night and bitten her to death. Possibly her husband as well. Anyhow, but Rabbi Akiva was only worried about his daughter. And she was saved. And when he asked her, yes, John?
Tzedakah tatzil mimavet.
Exactly. Tzedakah tatzil mimavet. What did she do? Everybody was preparing the wedding feast. A poor man came along and needed some charity. And nobody was paying attention. So she, the bride, went to her purse, took out some of her cash, gave it to the poor man. So this is the Jewish response, okay? You may be fated, but there is a way out if you do a mitzvah, all right? Shma mina ma'amin haya bahen. But that means that Rabbi Akiva was certainly worried enough about the astrology to be concerned for his daughter. There's also a story in the sugya about Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak was born under a constellation of winter stars and Mercury. That's a long astrological story. But he was going to be a thief, okay? Just like Rava was going to be a shedder of blood. So what did his mother say? This is famous because this is where our kippah or yarmulke comes from, okay? This Gemara. His mother said, look, because you have a predilection to be a thief, if you wear a kippah, that'll like be a symbol of Yirat Shamayim, and you won't obey your basic instinct dictated by the stars to steal. So I can cure you of your proclivity to theft. Here again, the Rambam would say, great stuff. You might be, by nature, tending to be a thief, but if you keep a mitzvah, you do something, you control yourself, you will not be pulled by your nature, okay? Even though the drive is there. Interesting thing, of course, is that what happened according to the Gemara, he was sitting outside giving a shiur, and there was a strong wind, very strong. His kippah blew off. He only had 2 bobby pins, not 4. So he lost his kippah. And as soon as he lost his kippah, what did he do? He looked up, he saw a palm tree, because he was giving the shiur under a palm tree. Palm tree has dates. He closed the Gemara. Well, the Gemara hadn't been written yet, but he closed whatever he was doing. He climbed up the tree, okay, just like a monkey, and he pulled dates, and wasn't his palm tree. He pulled a whole bunch of dates off, and he guzzled them. When he put his kippah back on, he had pangs of conscience. How could I do this? Okay, so these are stories that the Rashba cites to show you that, well, if the Gemara believes it, so should we. Elash Shepamim, 920. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Senes Lireyav. Sometimes God performs a miracle for those who fear him. Ulavatel mehem zerat hakochavim. And he will annul the decree of the stars. Which I guess means, in translating into more modern terms, you may have tendencies. They may be very strong. But if you make an effort you can overcome them. At least you won't get rid of the tendencies, but you won't act on them. There's a big difference between the two. These are the hidden miracles. Why hidden? Because you will not notice them, okay? That's how the world runs. We couldn't have a world without these hidden miracles, where our natures do not dictate how we act. And the whole of the Torah needs us to believe that we may have a nature. This is Rashba. This is not Rambam, of course. But this is the Rashba, a more standard rabbinical view. Yes, there are things out there that influence. Yes, we do come into the world with a package, maybe biopsychical, okay? But at the end of the day, a believing Jew says, I can avoid the worst consequences of those by an effort of the will, but I have to have a very strong will, and a belief in God that it can be done. And therefore we don't dictate our actions by astrological horoscopes, but by rationality. And he cites the pasuk Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elohecha. Walk simply with the Lord your God. Okay? Keep the mitzvot, do your best, and you'll be all right. Most of the time. Do more mitzvot, daven more, and you will find within yourself reserves of strength not to do the things that you shouldn't be doing, even though there's a drive to do so, which comes from a source over which you have no control. Middle Ages, it may have been your stars. Today, as I said, it's mainly biopsychical. Now the Rashba says something interesting. Let's leave the morals and the religious arena. Not talking about good and bad, but say this is indifferent. Say you're going out to work, okay? Rashba, 13th century Spain. Go out to work, and you've opened your newspaper, and your horoscope says today is the worst day possible for you to work. You are going to make a terrible mess. You might even be fired. Well, you might pay attention to that and stay home, okay? Ring up a boss. I really feel terrible today. Because you cannot rely ab initio on a miracle. You might be able to overcome that, but why waste the effort? It's only going to work, okay? And that's why the Rashba says, She'en tov limlachto. Professionally speaking, you know, if you have a bad day, and if you know that you're prone to certain, if you're having a tough time, there's a certain situation which might tempt you into something that you wouldn't want to do, well, don't put yourself in the situation, even though there's no mitzvah or aveira involved. Rashba says, you know what, I would even go as far as to say that in these matters which are morally and spiritually indifferent, do pay attention to the stars, or I'm putting a modern gloss on it, to your nature. Don't put yourself in a situation where you may be tempted. You know your weaknesses, you know your proclivities, but to do something which is absolutely wrong, okay, and put it down to a biopsychical proclivity, that is not permissible under any view in halakha. Okay, which may explain something. I'm not going to take this up now. There's a very interesting book by Dean Harris, actually. Jeff, do you know the book?
No, I haven't.
There's a book on psychiatry, on psychology, and it was written by a couple. It's called Nafshi Bishelati. It's a new book, and it's called Hilchot Briut HaNefesh, the law about mental health. Rabbi Yonatan Rosenzweig and Dr. Shmuel Harris. You know Dean? Jeff?
Yeah.
Okay, well, he is the co-author of this book, and it's a very interesting book, and it really stays within the parameters of this type of halakhic approach. But of course, it's informed by a lot of modern psychiatry and psychology. So, in fact, I'm going to just add to this, because this will be a good place. Wow, our time is almost gone, and there are 3 pages left. We're going to do that next week. But I'm going to read the Gaon of Vilna. Okay, now the Gaon of Vilna, as we know, was an opponent of Hasidism in his time. He believed that the Hasidic movement disrespected halakha. I know I'm making a very broad statement here, but don't have time to finesse it. But he definitely led a campaign against the Hasidic movement. Hence, the Litvaks, the Lithuanians, tended not to be Hasidim at all, and to go for the rational and follow the Gemara, not the Kabbalah. The interesting thing, of course, is that the Gaon himself was a great Kabbalist, and he wrote actually more works in Kabbalah than on anything else. Now, he does have notes on the Shulchan Aruch, the Biur Hagra, the Shulchan Aruch, but he wrote works on Kabbalah too. However, when it came to the Jewish way of life, halachic way of life, he was opposed to halachic, to Kabbalistic elements, mystical elements. For him, the Gemara was God. Okay, well, the Talmud says, Shalmi, Bavli, and the Tanaitic literature, that is the be-all and end-all, and we don't go beyond that. Okay, so what does he say? Interestingly enough, in Moreh Nevukhim. Now, Rabbi Yosef Karo in the Shulchan Aruch, line 26 says, Mishe nishacho akrav. Say you're bitten by a scorpion, mutar lilchosh alav. You can actually utter a secret saying. Okay? All right? A lachash, whisper, a charm, we'd say in English. All right? Some type of magic formula. Okay? Well, for example, well, anyhow, no, I'm going to spare you examples. There is no time. Shabbat. You can also do it on Shabbat. What's the problem with uttering protective lines of a mystical nature if you've been bitten by a scorpion? I would rather go to a doctor, but never mind. What's the problem with doing that on Shabbat? Well, the Rambam would say, well, we know that on Shabbat, you shouldn't spend your time in Dvarim Betelim, in vain and foolish matters. It's a serious day, okay? Rabbi Karo says, doesn't help at all. Ho'il u'mesukan hu hetiru. Why? And Jeff, this is where psychology comes in. If you don't say the right charm, you'll get neurotic. What are you going to do about your scorpion bite? Now, in a world of charms and in whispered incantations, well, if everybody believes in it, well, I do too. If I can't say it on Shabbat, I'm going to have a major problem. And so much modern halakha on psychological matters, says you can tweak halakha because you're driven by your mental needs, okay, for certain things, concessions. We'll talk about that another time, and we'll put it into our specific mitzvot in the Moreh Nevukhim. So this is Rav Yosef Karo, okay? Rav Yosef Karo was both a lawyer and a mystic. The lawyer, he follows the Rambam's Mishneh Torah ubiquitously, but he's a Kabbalist. Remember, he communed with a Maggid, a mysterious and mystical figure who entered his life in Adrianople. And are you holding up the book by Verblovsky, Jean? Joseph Caro, lawyer and mystic.
Yes.
Right, there's a famous book. I thought you were going to bring the book and show it to us. It's fine. It's okay. Okay? But, so Rabbi Yosef Karo here actually follows the Rambam. He says, you know what? There's nothing in it. These are mere incantations. They have no value at all. And in Shabbat, we should not be saying Dvarim B'Teilim, but because you feel a need for it, you will be allowed to. Gaon of Vilna, line 28. Harambam, this is the Rambam's view, which fits. Rambam says, incantations over a scorpion bite, you think that's rational, you think that's going to help, you're just a fool. Peti yamin l'chol davar, you'll believe anything. וכך כתוב בפירוש המשנה, בפרק ד' עבודת כוכבים, and he writes this in his laws of idolatry, אבל כל הבאים אחריו חלקו עליו. Everybody else disagreed. שהרי הרבה לחשים נאמרו בגמרא. In the Gemara, you find so many sentences to say when you get bitten by a scorpion, when it's too hot a day, when you think you're gonna be attacked by an army of ants. I was a boy growing up in Stamford Hill in London. I had a whole recipe book of psukim to say to ward off dogs, non-Jews, headaches, lachash, okay? None of it worked, except sometimes it did, for other reasons, but you'll believe anything if you think it might be true. The Gaon of Vilna uses strong terms. Rambam follows the cursed philosophy, because Gaon of Vilna is dealing already with the early modern age. Philosophy is beckoning good Jews. V'achen katav shekshafim v'shemot, names of God, spells, incantations, shadim. Remember the shadim, Jack? They're all over, right? You walk between two women, you can't, because it's full of shadim. Hakol hu sheker. Maimonides says it's all a lie, it's false, don't believe in it, you're an idiot. Aval kvar hiku oto al kod kodo. But everybody else has hit the Rambam on the head. Sharei matzinu harbe masiot b'gemara al pi shemot ukshafim. The Gemara is full of stories of witchcraft, of spells, and of using God's name. Sefer Yitzhak is a whole book of Kabbalah with letters put together in God's name. You can do things of a magic nature. Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oshia de'ivru igla tilta. Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oshia created a 3-month-old calf. Great veal. Best veal comes from a young calf to eat on Shabbat. They created such a calf on Friday using the Sefer Yetzirah. Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania da'amar shem v'ukmei ben shmaya la'ara. Rabbi Yoshua, there's a long sugya in Bechorot where he gets into all sorts of tricky situations. It's a bit like, the adventures of all these knights, a bit of a Don Quixote. But apparently he had to escape from a bad situation. He levitated between heaven and earth. He used a combination of the letters of God's name, and up he goes, levitates. Now from that to Jesus walking on the water, L'havdil elef havdalot, is not such a long stretch, but it's there. The idea of being able to levitate. In the Talmud, V'chen Avishai ben Tzruya. That's in Gemara and Sanhedrin. Avishai ben Tzruya, well, he helped King David. There's a guy called Yishbi, who was a Philistine. Yishbi Aplishti, rhymes, okay? And he was giving David a lot of problems. And he threw David up into the air, and Yishbi planted his sword in the place where David was going to fall down to land, and therefore he'd been impaled on the sword. So what did Avishai ben Tzruya do? He used Sefer Yetzirah, conjured up the names of letters in God's name, and lo and behold, David levitated. He was in the middle between heaven and earth, didn't go up, didn't go down. He stayed there until he was rescued. They killed Ishbi, they took away the sword. Anything in the Talmud, Melanie, anything and everything. Okay? More than you could imagine in all your philosophy, O Horatio, in the Babylonian Talmud. Now the Kemea, as we know, is an amulet, a charm with God's name written on metal or gold or silver, especially for women in childbirth. And more incantations than you would ever know, than you could count. Now, philosophy made Maimonides go astray. And he explained the Gemara, Hakol b'derech heltzi'i. Everything is metaphorical, nothing is literal. Don't believe in any of this stuff. V'la'kor otam mishpatan. V'chas v'shalom eini ma'amin b'hem lo mehem v'lo mehamonam. But I don't believe in any of this, in Maimonidean metaphors. Ela kol advarim hem kipshutan. Everything has to be understood literally. Ela sheyesh b'hem pnimiyut. And now the Gaon goes Kabbalistic. And we talked about the competition between rationalism and Kabbalism, which is always there, being rational and being mystical, or shall I say irrational. Gaon says that all of these incantations and these kameot, they have an internal truth, but it's not a philosophical truth, shezorkino to la'ashpa, that throws all of these Gemara sources into the waste paper basket. Shehem chitzoniot, ela shel ba'alei ha'emet. The Kabbalists know what it really means. So, Rabbi Joseph Caro, lawyer and mystic, the Gaon of Vilna, halachist and Kabbalist, it's all wonderful stuff, complex, but Rambam is outstanding as an absolute rejecter of the irrational. So that brings us to an end this evening. We'll do the famous chapter 32 of the third section of the guide awaits us next Wednesday evening, and it is the seminal chapter in relation to korbanot, to sacrifices, and the way the Rambam sees many of the mitzvot, and we look forward to that, I hope, in good health and with good news, and with the prospect of a Chanukah miracle, and the eternal faith of the Jewish people, and wise decisions by our leaders. And I'll close on that vein, but I'm happy to take a question or a comment before we end the Zoom. Jean.
Donc, apparently the Gra accept all what we said in the Gemara at face value, even if he sees something more deep in it. By contrast, Rabbi Yosef Karo, as you say, did never mingle halacha and pnimiyut. The best example is that in the first editions of the Shulchan Aruch, he writes that kaparot is stupidity. That was it was censored, but in the first Italian.
Absolutely correct.
Now we see that finally all these prejudices are so deep in the Jewish society, as you say. When I say Mazel Tov, I refer to such things. When I have a kippah, a yarmulke, donc c'est kedei sheyeh yirat shamayim. And finally, my question is the following: how could Rambam say of the Amoraim from one side that they believed in stupidity, and from the other side, in his Chibur HaGadol, all what they say is halacha l'maaseh. This is strange.
Well, actually, it's not. Not at all. The Rambam accepts the rational, the juridical interpretation of the Torah. You look at the Torah as a law book, and every law book has to be developed, right? You cannot stay with a law book that's 3,000 years old. So we have a tradition that develops the laws. As long as we're developing the laws and thinking as lawyers, then we're fine, okay? Rambam takes all this very seriously, and he tells you which view he thinks is the better view from a legal perspective. When it comes to things which are not purely legal, but involve something to do with real life, and it is irrational, he's not scared to say so. And so in his Hilchot Avodah Zarah, he says that astrology is a prohibition. It's under the rubric of nichush. Or let me give you another example. It was a famous example. Well, it may or may not be famous, but in Hilchot Shchita, talks about the fact that there is a problem with the upper jaw. The upper jaw is missing, then the animal is going to be treif. Right. The Gemara in Chulin says that the list of treifot is a closed list. Yud Chet treifot, 18 types of treifa, no more. You cannot add in, you cannot subtract. So he adds the upper jaw. The Gemara simply talks about the lower jaw being missing. That's a treifa. It's a defect in the animal which will eventually bring about its death. Therefore, it's going to be treif. There's no mention of the upper jaw. So actually, the same sages of Marseille were mentioned in the letter we've just read, wrote him and said, what's going on? You've added to the list, and the Gemara says you shouldn't add. So what the Rambam says is that had the rabbis of the Talmud known about the fact that the upper jaw is much more important for the health of the animal than the lower jaw, and because the animals like that we eat are out in the field all day, and they're subject to cold, and the cold gets in through the upper jaw, and that's what makes them ill and causes their lungs to be defective, they would have put it in were they able to. And therefore, I feel that I can fit it in. Now, I can give you many examples.
And the Mechaber accept that?
The Mechaber does not accept that, okay? But this is nevertheless in the Rambam. So the Minchat Chinuch, for example, on this says, well, you know what? Why does the Rambam do this? Why does he call the loss of the upper jaw a treifa? Because he is noteh acharei hamada. We all know that the Rambam follows science. So, and in fact, we just read, the Rambam will say, look, he also is famous for saying that the rabbis of the Talmud were children of their time when it comes to anything other than the chain of tradition. Halakhic tradition, we rely upon them. What they have to say about medicine or health or astronomy or physics or shadim or lachash or androgynous or tumtum, any of this, they are children of their time and they can get it wrong. And he'll say this is a minority opinion, this is not meant to be taken literally, or he'll say in certain matters they simply got it wrong because they didn't understand enough science. Rambam says so. So there we are. He's at least consistent in that. And you can see how he goes against the mainstream. Rashba, the Gaon of Vilna, they're all quite upset. Or they're certainly not willing to go the whole hog, if I can use that phrase, together with the Rambam. But the Rambam does. He has no inhibitions at all, and he pushes his agenda to the very limit. Okay? And we'll have a look next time at the mitzvah of korbanot as a good example of how he brings everything together in terms of rationality and a sacrificial cult, and his theory of how God wants to bring us up from primitive to much more sophisticated. But it takes a long time, apparently. Okay. If there are no more questions or comments,
can I just ask one short question?
Absolutely. Hopefully the answer will be short, Jack.
What would the Rambam say for the people who delay whatever act they want to commit for a Tuesday, because Tuesday it says twice Kitov, and they will postpone whatever they think is important and do that particularly on the Tuesday? Is that legitimate or is that no?
Well, the Rambam would be a little happier with that because at least it's not worshipping the stars or something other than Judaism. And there is a midrash. Tuesday is a good day. You want to get married on Tuesday, get married on Tuesday, as long as you don't make a big meal of this, okay? And if there's another mitzvah that you definitely need to do, Rambam will be horrified if you produce something like Parmaim Kitov on Tuesday, so I'm not going to do a mitzvah, midorait on Tuesday. He would say, are you out of your mind? Okay? So again, you know, he's always going to be, if it's in the midrash, if it's a nice idea, he would say, why not? But to make that into a principle that guides your life, absolutely not.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we will close the meeting.